I have approximately 80 criminal investigations running against myself. Yes, it's not really funny. If they kick in your door with a SWAT team, that's what they did. They swatted my place. At the same time, they swatted my mother's apartment and my brother's apartment. It is really interesting to see the crumbling, the imploding of Germany from an outside view. After a couple of years of this terror, I realized it's not about me. My case is a symptom for the complete erosion of anything that was slightly resembling democracy or a rule of law. And it was a very renowned university in Germany. I wanted to be a transplant surgeon. I already learned how corrupt the scientific industry is during that time. That kind of spoiled my dreams there. What most nations around Germany ask themselves constantly, what is fucking wrong with the Germans? What kind of problem? What genetical disposition? What kind of social? I don't know. I really don't know. And I would really like to find out. We had underground parties and we had excessive parties in the COVID time because immediately after they enforced lockdowns, I invited all my neighbors. I told them, well, let police fuck themselves. I'm not gonna be told by German police not to dance. I mean, that is Nazi talk, like swing tanzen verboten. Why do the Germans cooperate that much? Why was the chief villain, Klaus Schwab, the prototypical fascist professor from Germany? Look at the so-called critical race theory, that when you refuse to talk about the guilt of the white race, then that instantly, according to them, proves your extreme white pride fascist tendency. It's not about left or right at all. What you just said before is that right is just the sort of the negative, the demon, like being right is the demonic threat they use to keep you away.
Do you believe in democracy, actually?
I think democracy is a joke. Obviously, democracy is a joke. There is no democracy. The definition of fascism, to bundle up, that's what fascism actually means, to bundle different political powerhouses within a society into one unit of decision making. And that's actually what central banks are. So abolishing a central bank would be the thing we actually need to do.
93% of the viewers of this channel aren't subscribed. If you're enjoying this content, a like, comment, and a sub really helps my content show up for others too. Thanks so much for your support. Today we're joined by Dr. Paul Brandenburg, a German physician, author, and civil rights activist. He became known in Germany after his outspoken criticism of the COVID-19 policies and for challenging what he saw as a culture of silence and obedience in politics and medicine. After facing state repression and home searches himself, he left Germany for Switzerland. I think he's an outstanding guest to talk about freedom, control, obedience, and state repression, and what it takes to defend our rights to remain sovereign individuals. So welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for joining us.
Daniel, thanks for having me.
During the pandemic, we saw how things can change very quickly, how people were willing to follow just orders that were kind of instructed out of the blue, and how they were willing to exclude other people. Was this surprising to you, or did it confirm patterns that you were already familiar with anyway?
Well, as a German, of course, I was sort of, I had low hopes for Germany. I was pretty sure that people would react with obedience. And I'm not only saying that as a joke. I grew up, or I was schooled among Americans in West Berlin. Like for the first 6 years of my school life, I've never actually met German authorities and German teachers. So I grew up among Americans. And after changing to a German high school, I already noticed that these people tend to be very high on obedience. And with me being a rather young doctor when it all started, I was pretty sure that the whole German health system, which is very authoritarian, I mean, it's still based on military ranks. It's hard to believe for non-Germans. Within the hospitals, we have the ranks of Oberarzt and Chefarzt, and we even had Unterassistent, like it's under assistant, and an overlord doctor. It's really absurd. And that all stems from Prussian military traditions. That's no joke. The first big hospital in Europe was the Charité. That's a Prussian military hospital in the middle of Berlin. It's one of the largest hospitals in Europe, actually, nowadays. And these military ranks, they still reflect the way doctors treat each other within this hospital system. So I was very sure when the so-called pandemic, and it has never been a pandemic from a medical point of view. I'm sorry to be the doctor here. When this fake pandemic hit, I was really convinced. I had the feeling this is going to just go through Germany like a hot knife through butter, because people will accept this complete overreach by the state. And what I had not expected, to be very honest, is that a few years later, I would be in exile here in my volcanic mountain in Switzerland, because I had to leave the state, the country, the nation of Germany, because just now when we're talking right now, I have approximately 80 criminal investigations running against myself. Yes, led by the general prosecutor, the prosecutor general of the state of Berlin. Like personally, from the highest prosecutor in the territory, or not Commonwealth, but this state, like Germany is a federal state of Berlin. It's pretty absurd. Sounds funny if you look at it from the outside, but it's not really funny. If they kick in your door with a SWAT team, that's what they did. They swatted my place. At the same time, they swatted my mother's apartment and my brother's apartment, all on the on trumped up charges of me actually I'm supposed to be just forming a military unit and equipping them with weapons of war. Completely absurd what they trumped up. They already dropped these charges. Of course, they had to after 2.5 years, because there was nothing to validate that. But they keep on forcing their so-called investigations based on the new paragraph they introduced 2.5 years ago. Majestätsbeleidigung, that is defamation of political figures. So defamation of authorities. That is actually a criminal thing in Germany now. And yeah, I don't know what they're trying to do, but it looks, that's what my lawyers tell me, it looks like they're trying to get me in jail because of criticizing the government for exactly what they did during this so-called pandemic.
Wow. 80 charges, you said. Is that right?
80 criminal investigations from the last time I checked. I can't really tell, and somewhere between mid-70s and 80s now, because you only get these records from the state prosecutors once a year. You only have the right to get the latest record once a year, where they have to inform you about criminal investigations that have not yet been up to public.
Wow, and how do you deal with that? I mean, do you have to respond to every one of them?
Oh my God, no. Well, after you get the first 1 or 2 letters from a public prosecutor, like telling you this maximum sentence will be 5 years, and you have to be, you're really kind of nervous. And every time you get a new letter from these people with their letter sign or with their logo on the outside, you're kind of nervous. But you know, after 10 or 20 letters, you kind of get used to it. I mean, whenever I travel to Germany, which I still do quite often because I have family there, I work there. Most of my reporting is about German politics and European politics. When I just get into a police control at the border, because formally we have a Schengen area here, so there's no border control within these the core states of Western Europe. But occasionally they just pick someone out and scan them, and when that hits me, it's usually about 2 hours long, because the policemen then just see this huge file. There are a couple of public prosecutors who want me, who want some statement or a recent address or something from me. And it's kind of interesting, because you, after a few years now with a certain reputation, you instantly notice how these policemen regard these charges. Because if you're in bad luck, these people are very stern and look at you in a very harsh way. Oh, so you're one of these delegitimizers. You are threatening our democracy. And then there's the other end of the scale. You have cops just looking at the computer. Oh my God, what's this? What? There are 80 cases of insulting with investigations by the chief general prosecutor? That is absurd, isn't it? I mean, that's political. I said, well, just go on, just forget it. Here's your passport. I had that too. So it is really interesting to see the crumbling, the imploding of Germany from an outside view, because personally, after a couple of years of this terror, I realized it's not about me. I mean, I'm really not that important. I'm not that famous. I'm not that relevant to anything going on in Germany, but it's a symptom. So like my case is a symptom for the complete erosion of anything that was slightly resembling democracy or a rule of law or some form of a liberal state. Germany obviously never was that kind of nation.
Insane. I mean, let's. Yeah, I want to get back to that, but you also said it's typically German, right? And you have these hierarchies in hospitals. Is that different in other places?
Yes, it is. I've spent a lot of my medical residency outside of Germany because obviously I quit my first job in Germany after a week, or after 2 weeks, actually. I handed in my resignation. It was a very renowned university in Germany. I wanted to be a transplant surgeon. I was training to be a visceral transplant surgeon, just transplanting livers and kidneys, and being in the lab half of the time and the bedside on the other time. So I was kind of an idealist in that. And I already learned how corrupt the scientific industry is during that time. That kind of spoiled my dreams there, and it also got me critical about the whole system. So I was kind of separating myself from that system. But before COVID hit, that is why I was so sure that it will really be enforced by this German system. And why the Germans, you ask, as a Dutch? Yeah, well, I ask you, my Dutch neighbor and friend. I think it's what most nations around Germany ask themselves constantly. What is fucking wrong with the Germans? What kind of problem, what genetical disposition, what kind of social, I don't know. I really don't know. And I would really like to find out. I mean, be honest, other nations, they fell to fascism very fast too. We have Australia. I mean, it's more than like southern China, right? Australia was a fascist hellhole. We had extreme reactions by Spanish authorities. If you look at the Spanish Isles, they invaded them with military. They had soldiers running up to the hotels, screaming at people, stay in your... So, but in most of these nations, if you talk to these people, I've done a lot of traveling, you had the official side where it was very authoritarian, and just on the backside, on the unofficial side, people treated each other like a mensch, huh? And they treated each other like a bit more relaxed. Not so in Germany. I remember we had underground parties, and we had excessive parties in the COVID time, because immediately after they enforced lockdowns, I invited all my neighbors. I told them, well, let police fuck themselves. I'm not going to be told by German police not to dance. I mean, that is Nazi talk, like swing tanzen verboten. That's what they had in these times. So yeah, but it was actually all true and sad in Germany. Why do the Germans cooperate that much? Why was the chief villain, Klaus Schwab, the prototypical fascist professor from Germany, that WEF chairperson? I really don't know, Daniel. Tell me, what's wrong with the Germans? How can one grasp, how can one explain their tendency to subdue to terror, to anti-democratic, anti-liberal resentments like that? And at the same time, and that is the most absurd thing, at the same time, constantly talk about how they are defending, quote, their democracy by abolishing all freedom, all civil rights, and all acts of freedom. It is absurd. And you know what? I know it sounds extreme, but I honestly believe, I firmly believe that it had to be the same way when the Nazis came to power. I am very sure that these people really believe they're doing something good, they're doing something that is absolutely justified, and they really regarded their enemies as some form of threat, parasitic threat. And that is exactly the rhetoric we are hearing now from the present German regime. So I honestly believe there is not much difference between the so-called Federal Republic, the former German Democratic Republic, and the Nazi Reich. Of course, it is very different in its consequences. Let's be absolutely clear about that. We're not talking about any Holocaust situations here. People are not mass murdered in camps. That is obvious. But the mechanisms, these mechanisms of authority and these mechanisms of obedience within the people, I mean, they had to be all the same. Don't you agree?
I agree. And sometimes I felt drawn to think that it's typically German. But then I also had to realize it's, I mean, if I was talking to Dutch family, there were not much difference, I have to say. They were not so different.
Well, the Dutch and the German, they have a lot of similarities. I'm sorry I keep insulting you here. I don't mean to.
No, that's totally fine. But I mean, it's also, I mean, as you said, Australia was a horror.
Yes.
China anyway, New Zealand.
Yeah, but Daniel, you know what the difference I see? The difference I see is right now, they're actually talking about mistakes that have been made. They're not in that delusion that everything was absolutely perfect. You know, the official narrative in Germany is we came through the pandemic very good, and we need to be glad how good anything went. And there are no big errors we need to think about or talk about. That is totally different, even in New Zealand, in Australia, and of course in the United States, where authorities openly admit that there were lies, there was manipulation, and there's a process of kind of, clearing yourself of that. Nothing of that can be seen in Germany. They just stick to the lie that everything done was absolutely great.
Yeah, because if they talk about the truth, then a lot of people are going to be in trouble. And it's true. In other countries, there's more cover-up, more things are getting to the surface. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know what the difference is. I mean, the hierarchies in a hospital. Why is that? Why are people there not being educated to think for themselves? Are people in general not educated to think for themselves?
Well, you know what? I honestly believe that Tucker Carlson is right. If you ever heard Tucker Carlson talking about the Germans, he did that a couple of times because he was asked how Nord Stream was ever possible. You remember Nord Stream, this gas pipeline within the Baltic Sea? It was just surprisingly blown to pieces, and the German government was very fast to say that was, of course, something done by terrorist organizations from whatever. It was completely clear to the whole world that the United States obviously managed this whole terror attack. And Tucker Carlson, famous U.S. conservative host, said, well, if you look at Germany, the thing is that obviously these people really despise themselves. There is no nation that is comparably willing to damage itself, to ridicule itself, to throw itself in the dirt at the feet of their so-called allies. Allies do not blow up your gas pipeline. The people who do that are not your allies. And he went on to say, and I'm not joking, if you look at the messed up German sex life, you know everything about them. And sorry, Daniel, he is right. Mr. Carlson is right, and my personal belief is that German self-hatred must be so extreme, obviously. They must obviously feel some form of guilt that they've been taught. And I'm not talking only about the Holocaust. It's not only the horrors that actually have been done in the Second World War. They're, of course, obvious. But
what else?
Sorry?
What else?
Yeah, I really can't tell you that, but I do believe that the same patterns of German behavior now, the same obedience towards these authorities. You probably know the German word Kadavergehorsam. That means, and if you literally translate that, it's sort of roadkill obedience or corpse obedience, meaning to be obedient even if it means that you will be killed and rot to the core. It means obedience for the sake of obedience. It's a typical German word. I believe no other nation would come up with this kind of word. And I do believe that this same pattern must already have been there when Hitler came to power. I believe the Germans were willing and able to, or the other way around, a monstrosity like Hitler probably is only possible in a nation like Germany, because you need to be willing to really accept the fact that the complete totalitarianism, this strange teaching that the individual has to suffer for the whole healthy body of the nation in order to save the rest. I mean, just this obvious need to have some form of heroic, to be a hero while being obedient. It's a really perverted thing. And the only thing that really explains that, if you look at present German politics, I mean, they're actively destroying their energy infrastructure. They're actively destroying their road infrastructure. They're actively destroying their social system and their whole financial infrastructure. They're actively destroying public security with mass rapings and knife murders, and that sort of doubled almost in the last 10 years, with only Arabic Muslims being, or more or less just almost only Arabic Muslims being the perpetrators there. They are in full denial about all these facts. Like, the public German narrative about all this is that these things are not facts. These things are made up by right-wing extremists threatening our democracy, and the German public is not actually questioning its government about that, but they're criticizing, in their majority still, they're criticizing free journalists and publicists who publish these facts, while at the same time, this is public knowledge in the Anglo-Saxon countries. I mean, they have similar discussions, of course, and very, very intense discussions, even political murders like the one with Charlie Kirk, but it's taking place in public in Germany. If you visit Germany, you have to correct me if I'm not true. Whenever I go to Germany and you bring up these kind of topics in public, the people are in full denial. The instant you bring them up, you say, "Oh, you're not one of those Nazis saying this, they're spreading these kind of lies, right?" The public TV just informed us yesterday at the primetime news station, because that is still the #1 news station and news outlet in Germany, Tagesschau. They informed us that is Russian propaganda. Like, you have in Germany, it's like the feeling is, for me, is like being in the wrong movie. You have this feeling as if they're all sleepwalking and in complete denial of what's happening, on whichever end of the political spectrum you are.
Yeah, yes, I feel the same in many ways. I think main reason is probably the basic division into left and right. I believe, at least that's my personal feeling, most of us were raised with the idea that the left is good and the right is bad, and then we have this firewall against the right and all these arbitrary boundaries with regards to COVID, where they just said, okay, if you're against the measures, then you're right wing, or you're very closely related to right wing, and that's a very bad thing to do. And it's so internalized in Germans. But I have to say also, I find it incredible, because I also see that in the UK, in Holland, in other places in the US, that also there, this kind of mechanism has a grip on people.
Well, but has it? Does it have in the same way? I mean, you're right. On one hand, I totally agree. Right was bad. If you're right, the German subtext was always you're almost a Nazi. Like, being right, that is sort of equivalent with Nazi. And of course, in Germany, being a Nazi is sort of the worst thing you can be. I mean, just especially if you have parents that still experience the war. So, but why? Why does it work? Why does it work to tell people that if they do not accept an ultra-left woke agenda, that they're immediately Nazis, and it's not okay to be sort of patriotic or to be sort of conservative in a way, that you do not want to share your family's wealth and history with some invader from Syria? Why is that possible to make to shame people for this urge? And because in Germany it worked for many years. It worked that it sort of publicly shamed people and that they were not willing to say publicly, "No, I do not want these kind of so-called immigrants." It was a taboo to say that, because you're instantly, even in so-called conservative circles, they were instantly afraid that it could be shamed as Nazis. And that, of course, does not work outside of Germany, because even in Switzerland, if you call someone a Nazi, they look at you and say, "Well, bitte was?" Yeah, it's banal, right?
I wouldn't say it doesn't work in other countries. I think it does. Maybe not to such an extent, but I mean, if you look at the UK, I mean, it's also something. It's not good to be called a Nazi, or you're being labeled a Nazi. They also have problems with. Of course,
of course not. But of course, it's always an insult. That is without question. But how effective is it to shame people, right? That is the question, to actually manipulate them with that, because they're afraid of being called that way. And that was highly effective in Germany. Even being called a right-tendent politician, or even to be called only right, was a very intense insult in Germany. It wasn't in Great Britain or in the States. So the thing is, for me, why are these people so easily shamed? And that goes back to what Tucker Carlson said. I really think Germans have this tendency to hate themselves, to hate their nation, to be ashamed of being Germans. And I say that as someone who never felt pride for being a German. Like, I really believe it's pure coincidence. I could be from Mongolia or whatever. So I do not feel any pride for the place I come from. I do like my hometown of Berlin. I have no problem with patriots. But why is it possible, especially in Germany, way to make them feel this intense level of shame and get them to behave in a very totalitarian way. And if that already worked under Hitler and the Nazis, then the Nazis could not be the reason for this feeling. They obviously used it. They abused this mechanism too. So I personally believe it was there even before the Nazis. It must be something very deeply rooted within these people.
Yeah, but maybe also in all people. I mean, I think the whole woke, the identity politics also shows how people are trained to focus on other people and on their problems and on minorities and to accept whatever problems they have and forget about their own pride, forget about their own patriotism. Maybe. I mean, I personally, I cannot do anything with patriotism myself. I told you before, I was raised in Germany. My nickname was Dutch guy, and then I also have some Lebanese input, and I was raised with a Georgian stepfather, and then I lived in Holland. So I'm very multicultural, you could say. So in Holland, I was always called a German guy. So I cannot do anything with patriotism, but I can understand that people have that, and I can
absolutely
understand that people go back to that. Yeah. So what is it with obedience? I think the Milgram experiments showed that most people obey rules even though they even don't believe in them. And then you have obedience because of belief. Because of people being manipulated, because of propaganda. Yeah. So you have people following orders even though they're not believing, and then you have propaganda. What is worse? And do better systems shape better people, or do we really have to change the character of people?
Well, I don't think you can change people, but just think about that, what we just said for a moment. That, for me, the actual measure of true obedience is a form or an extreme of obedience that the obedient actually turns against himself. Because it's one thing in Milgram to torture another, but only Germans would be willing to torture themselves in a Milgram experiment. And I do think that they're taking obedience to a completely new level. Because the thing is that in all these countries, you had lots of reports of restaurants or whatever illegitimately opening or opening in secret and throwing big parties, and cops who sort of alarmed some places. They checked just a few minutes in advance to give people a chance to go away. So they're sort of enforcing the law in a very humane way. And Germans would never do that. Germans would turn themselves in if they believed that they accidentally wore their mask in the wrong way or something. That is a level of obedience I think it's pretty typical of the Germans. So I do think there's a quality difference there in the level of obedience between Germans and most other countries I have seen during this so-called pandemic. And I mean, in Italy, even in Italy, that has a fascist tradition too. The Secretary of Health was charged with murder charges shortly after the so-called pandemic ended, because it was known that these results that the pharmaceutical industry there spread were totally false, and he was charged with murder of elderly people who he almost forced to have the vaccination. So I mean, I'm not happy with the results of these investigations, but at least there was some kind of public revolt against that. Of course, they were obedient, but they turned on these people afterwards. And if you look at forget Corona for instance, the whole COVID thing, because it's been years ever since. If you look at the present situation of the European Union, I mean, it's a mess. It is an absolute mess. We have a completely bankrupt French nation, which is it's like Greece a couple of years ago. We have an almost bankrupt Germany. Like economically, this continent is in bits and pieces, and the European Union is, especially with her mafia queen Ursula von der Leyen, is in complete denial about these facts. Of course, they're aware. Is
she in denial, or is it all planned?
It's planned, of course. No. It's personally, I'm absolutely sure that personally is absolutely aware of things going on, but they're publicly denying it. They refuse to even talk about it, and there is a lot of criticism for that among the so-called European Union states. But the least level of criticism is in Germany, of course. Like France, you have mass protesters officially asking for France to leave the European Union. They're calling for the Frexit. If you come up with a Dexit in Germany, ask for Germany to leave the European Union, you have public crowds just chanting, "You're a Nazi." Nobody would ever ask that. So it's the same thing all over again with the situation of the European Union. And what really sets German obedience apart is that they keep on being obedient, just like Hitler in his bunker, right until they get that bullet into their brain, and even if they know they're heading straight for that bullet. I mean, if you look at the migration levels in Germany, it's really comparable to the United Kingdom. We have a huge invasion problem of Arab Muslims in Germany, and the regime is in complete denial about that. They're framing everybody who's criticizing it as a Nazi, as an extremist, a enemy of the state. They're actually calling for people to be arrested if they openly criticize that. And it's an extreme, I think that kind of extreme is unthinkable in the United States.
Yeah, that obedience is indeed strange, but maybe, I mean, I'm realizing even you yourself turning on the Germans again. So maybe it's a mechanism of elevating yourself after that bad history the Germans had, to elevate yourself into a position where you can start dictating again.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's guilt. I mean, it obviously worked with developed nations, and I mean the whole white shaming
if you're
only
totally,
works with.
Sorry, if you're totally not patriotic and have nothing to do with pride about where you come from, and at the same time you celebrate all other cultures, then it's kind of like an imbalance, and that is maybe a way for Germans to elevate them into a position where they cherish and accept everyone else, and from there they're in a moral position. They maybe feel to start dictating again.
Yeah, well, but that suggests that they sort of have a tendency to, if there is some bad urge to rule over others. Could be. I can't prove that wrong. But look at these kind of people who really accept the woke mind virus, who are really susceptible for the woke mind virus. You have these men in women's clothes who call themselves transgender. They're actually only perverts or psychopaths, and you see, if you look at them, if you talk to them, you have a history of self-hatred in there. They obviously had gigantic problems with themselves, and it's a really typical mechanism for people to turn their aggression that they have for themselves outward, attack others, and they want to make other people unhappy and hate themselves too. That is the same thing with these transgender killers, for example. Charlie Kirk's murder is obviously also a transsexual affiliate, or his lover is supposed to be a transsexual. So they're within all these really messed up personalities, people who want to oppress others, who want to force their ideas on others, who want to physically harm them if they reject their ideology. The common pattern is very often self-hatred to a very extreme degree, and some form of sort of revenge at the end. Like, you can take all that self-hatred and take your revenge on people who, up until they met you, had a pretty nice life and who never bothered to hate themselves, and even maybe they didn't even hate others. They were just kind of happy with themselves. But it's a very German thing to grab or wie heißt das auf Deutsch? Ist es übergriffig zu werden, so to force yourself on them with your ideals. So I think I see a lot of parallels between these woke radicals in the US and German mainstream. German mainstream, from my point of view, is sort of the woke radical part of the USA. And my self-hatred, from my point of view, is the most likely explanation for that.
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels there too, because you are supposed, and also again this arbitrary boundary. If you comply and you follow the dictate of how you have to speak, then you have to accept whatever pronoun someone is assigning to themselves, and you're taught to not believe your eyes anymore, and you're taught to just accept this this language, and that's also kind of obedience, which kind of is similar, I think.
Yeah. The thing is, there's a simple test we can always find out if it's that kind of obedience, because it's illegal wanting to be left alone. And that is something very new, because these people demand the others to subdue, to accept their service. It's like Islamistic missionaries, like radical Muslims. You can't say, go away, I'm not interested in Allah or Muhammad. What? You're not interested in the Prophet, you must die. And it's quite similar with these wokists. They can't accept that you just do not want to have to do with them. And look at the so-called critical race theory, that when you refuse to talk about the guilt of the white race, then that instantly, according to them, proves your extreme white pride fascist tendency, because you have to hate yourself in order to be part of the good gang, right? That is just taking the whole concept to an extreme. And I never really cared about my color of skin, and I never thought that whiteness is something issue you have, but we're now at a point where you honestly have to admit, from my point of view, that white lives don't matter. It's quite obvious that if white people are killed, that is something you're supposed to praise as a white person. And it's really absurd. So the pattern there is, learn to hate yourself. Accept self-hatred as the basis of your obedience. And that's the German way.
As you said, actually, racism or not being racist means that you do not care about the color of your skin. And we start caring about the color of the skin much more again. So black people get certain advantages when they apply for a job, or in Germany, women get a job more easily when they have the same qualifications, stuff like that. So that's,
and again, sorry, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, like DEI hires. That it is already a thing in the States. I mean, it's the butt of a joke, right? They're talking about the former era of DEI. And in Germany, it's still a thing. Like, it's not over. And if you're talking about the former diversity and inclusion era, they look at it, what former? We need to be inclusive and have, I mean, it's Germans are really 10 years behind the world. And my fear is that they will just keep on radicalizing themselves, and they're running straight into the abyss with this attitude.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically racism and sexism if you start following this identity politics, which we see here. But there's a lot of backlash now also, right? So the whole division between left and right, left is good, right is bad, that's not really working so well anymore. So there's a fundamental shift. So it's becoming popular to be right. I'm not sure if that's going to be an answer. Probably it's not really going to be an answer, because when I saw Charlie Kirk, when I saw all the crazy leftists making fun of Charlie Kirk, then I saw also all the right-wing people like starting to report them. So what about freedom of speech here, or accepting state surveillance? And I thought, okay, well, even for myself, I thought, yeah, for a moment, I thought, okay, now they got them, or this German TV reporter, now he cannot enter the US anymore. But that's actually the mechanism how we start accepting more systems of surveillance, right?
True. I mean, there's a bit of Schadenfreude in there. It's another German word that's very typical. And I mean, they deserve their portion of Schadenfreude for being on no-fly lists, because they congratulated the murderer of someone. I do not find that sorry, but of course the mechanism behind that, and I totally agree with you there, that proves that obviously the public attitude is so wary right now, so aggressive. I see no chance, and I really mean it, I see no chance for these factions to ever accept a common reality. They will forever probably, if one says the sun will be rising tomorrow, then the other fraction will probably deny that and say, no, then the sun never rose. It never ever rose in any morning, anyway, in any point of history of the world. They're so in war with each other. They will oppose each other just for principal reasons. And that is one of the main reasons I believe that the political fate of Germany and the European Union in extension, because be honest, I mean, Germany Germany is the largest economy of the continent, and it's sort of it's the fate of France right now, and the collapse of the French financial system that hangs on Germany's stability. So probably these economical factors will decide the immediate political future. But I do think that there's little to no alternative to a complete crash and to poverty and to extreme social situations, because large portions of the nation or of the people there are not willing to cooperate by any chance. I believe they need existential threats like common famine, hunger, a lack of health systems. They probably need dire situations to learn to work together again. I know it sounds pretty weird, but that is sort of the present attitude, the public attitude you have in Germany. I mean, you cannot.
But not only Germany. Not only Germany. I realize you like to hack on Germany, but I mean also in the US, in the UK. We had this big demonstration in the UK with Tommy Robinson, and I totally agree. I see people really hating on each other, and at the same time, I very much believe that if we would have, if we would start from zero, we would have a lot of common ground. Like, most people don't hate homosexuals. Most people are not racist. Most people would say healthy immigration is okay, but if people come here and start murdering people, then get them out. I believe there is a common ground, but it's not really what some forces want, right? I think.
No, but you're talking about facts, right? And reality. We're not. I personally believe that our problems are not based on facts or measures of reality, but it's politics, ideologies that are opposed to each other. And what you just implied, I guess what you just implied is that a rather small fraction, like the reigning regime in Germany and the European Union, really profits from this extreme division. We have a very an absurdly rich, a parasitic caste of political elites in Germany, completely disconnected from the common worker. I mean, we have these extreme, our recent foreign minister, she was just clinically imbecile. The woman was just, neutrally speaking, stupid. She was made the foreign minister of Germany. She had, I think, a record budget of hairdressers and cosmetics traveling around with her. She took flights like for a few hundred kilometers for a thing that would have been a 1 hour drive. She was taking planes like on tax money. So we have an extreme level of corruption in Germany at the moment. That's something that's widely acknowledged also by even the state-controlled media. We have a huge system comparable to US aid of so-called NGOs. Actually, a friend of mine, Patrick Baab, calls them gongos, governmentally organized non-governmental organizations. And this extreme level of corruption in Germany, with a very high level of taxation already. Germany is one of the highest tax countries, with a state quota of pretty much 50%. So it's already a sort of quasi-socialistic or fascistic economical system, like with the half of it being governmentally controlled. We have a huge level of corruption, a huge transfer of tax money to these politically controlled elites, to a gigantic system of bureaucrats. And this system, of course, the political elite with the bureaucrats, is completely opposed to any form of reformation, to any form of change in that. So their apparatus, and with the German media, the publicly controlled, the state-controlled media, it has a budget of 8 billion euros, or almost 9 billion euros every year, because every German citizen is forced to pay almost 20 euros every month for the funding of the governmental media system. This huge machinery of media and politics is directed at telling people that if you demand transparency and if you criticize this complex, then you're a Nazi, then you are someone who wants to kill gays, who wants to torture babies, of course, who wants to let old people die die because he refuses to wear a mask. So this whole block of people who profit from this corruption, they're on the warpath, and they know that they have no chance on a basis of negotiation to save their asses, because the opposing political party is, of course, calling for the complete abolishment of this media apparatus. They're calling for investigations into what happened during COVID, and the reaction of the regime is that they're outlawing them, that they're actually outlawing them. They're trying to arrest them. They use the methods of the secret police, which is pretty comparable to Stasi and Gestapo. They tap their phones. We have huge machinery. Very many people do not know that outside of Germany. We have a so-called domestic political intelligence service, the Verfassungsschutz, that would translate to constitutional protectors. And the only thing they do is actually wiretap and surveil the regime critics like myself or members of the opposing AfD party. And yeah, from an economical point of view, my fear is that there is no logical chance that these people will be willing to negotiate. They will try to profit from this system of corruption until the very last day. And the very last day will be the day when the German taxpayers are actually completely broken because of their self-hatred and fueled obedience. They will continue paying until they're completely bankrupt.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the left and the right, is that something you think that's important?
No.
Do you think it's enough that, I mean, we see a shift, so the AfD might win the next election. Is that something enough? Is that enough for change, or do we need more fundamental change, like the party system,
No.
for example, being not?
I don't think that is. It's not about left or right at all. What you just said before is that right is just the sort of the negative, the demon. Like being right is the demonic threat they use to keep you away from these kind of tendencies. But if you look at it more close, it's not about left or right at all. The present German government we have, it's not left. They like to call themselves left because, especially in Germany, left is connotated as being social, as being interested in other people, as being open-minded, but that is just complete bullshit. The classical left political concepts are taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. Like that is basically left. And basically right is to stick to people's individual rights and say that an individual is the most important thing, and the state may only take money from the individual in certain cases, and the state has no right to interfere with your personal life planning. Those are very much simplified, I think, concepts of left or right. And that is nothing we see in public discussions right now. Like no aspect of the politics of these regimes in Germany and the EU are neither left nor right. But of course, they claim that. They claim to be from the middle. That's what they constantly say. Everything is the middle party. Like they're all the middle, although they are extreme in their totalitarian tendency. And they frame anything that is opposing them to be right-sided. That's just nothing one should, I think, spend its time on to kind of follow these framings there. The thing is, what they're actually trying is to every notion of a voter, every notion of self-protection, of the feeling of self-worthness, of the feeling of preservation of their historical or family ties, that is deemed to be Nazi or right, and it's sort of outlawed and delegitimized to make these people to have these people learn that they need to sort of despise all their heritage, their cultural traditions, and to make them more obedient for these corrupt regime guys. So it's really not about left or right. From my point of view, it's a classical tale of a degenerate and decoupled elite that is sucking its people dry.
Yeah, I agree. So what is the solution? I guess we need a systemic change.
Yeah,
I'm often thinking about decentralization of power.
Yeah.
How can we achieve that? And is the party system, for example, is that suitable? Do you believe in democracy, actually?
I think democracy is a joke. Obviously, democracy is a joke. There is no democracy, not in Germany or in Europe. I do not see democracy there. I think the closest thing to democracy probably is the United States, where you have a system of more checks and balances. And don't get me wrong, I'm not promoting the U.S. system as being ideal or the final state of what we could evolve into. But I mean, I'm an emergency response physician, so I'm pragmatic from my basic concept. I have a lot of sympathies for libertarian guys who believe that any form of authority should be abolished and that a privately governed system is the ideal thing. But I fear it's a bit too drastic and something many people are just too afraid to accept. So if we want to convince a lot of people to try out a system with more personal responsibility, less authoritarian state power, and a more division of authority, then we're actually trying to convince them of something that is more like the US system, right? Where you have actual checks and balances, where you have actual separations of power. So and even if you regard this to be highly flawed, and I guess it is, I mean, Trump told us something we already knew, that the deep state in Washington is a problem. Now we realize, and most people knew before, and then Trump is obviously also not the solution to this deep state, but it's even worse in Europe. That's what I'm saying. It's even worse in Europe from my point of view. We have very old traditions of quasi monarchistic or rather very elitistic regimes with very little democratic aspects there. And I do not think, my topic is Germany and my experience is from Germany, I do not think that this German regime system will allow any basic change in its party-based power structure, because the German constitution says that all the power derives from the people and that political parties are a mere instrument to form this political will. That's verbatim what the constitution says. And the reality is that German political parties, unlike in the United States, these party organizations, party committees, they decide who actually gets to run for office. They give people a place on the voting lists there. So the parties are the actual powerhouses in Germany. If we want to break their force, if we want to break their power, we have to break this law, giving the parties the political power, and they will not accept that. They will not give this power away without a fight.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And what do you think about the money system as a fundamental layer of control? Like we have fiat system now where where central banks can just print money out of thin air at whenever they want. We saw with COVID, they just printed, I think, 40% of the dollars on top. Yeah. And used the pandemic to just do that. And so that's what is already possible now. And with that, they can just steal our purchasing power. So they're not only taxing us officially, they're also taxing us unofficially, which is basically theft. And I think October officially is the start for CBDCs for like introduction, not like to retail, but CBDCs is like an even bigger mechanism of control. So with all digital ideas, CBDCs, I mean, for the viewers that don't know, CBDCs is basically programmable money where you can assign functions that you can only buy stuff geographically or only certain products, or it's only valid for a certain amount of time. And if you're government critical, you could just get disconnected from your wallet. So that's where we're heading. So I think good systems play a big role. And I'm talking about Bitcoin a lot because with Bitcoin, they have a hard time to just it's not really possible for them to manipulate that. With regards to social media, we have Nostr. I'm not sure if you heard of Nostr. Nostr is like the same with Bitcoin. You have a private key and you can use different services to log into your profile, and one service could kick you out, but then you go to another service, log in. Again, you have your followers and messages because they're all spread through certain relays. So building systems that just disperse power and decentralize power, I think could be a big solution. How do you see that? And do you see also other solutions in that respect?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you know that I'm sort of a reborn Bitcoiner there. I've been just lately converted. You obviously have been following the whole thing for years. And to be honest, I'm from a biomedical part of the world and of the thought teaching. So it was not something that I really, that I focused on a lot. And I'm not a money guy, which I really regret, because it's just now during this power struggle, I realized how essential actually the financial flow there is. And everything you just said about the fiat system, sort of, or anything I said before that about the German party-based power system applies to the fiat-based money system too. Because in Germany, you have this political party layer that few people really realize and just see how this backdoor, back chamber party system really manipulates and controls power. And it's the same thing with the centralized banks. All these central banks, like from the Fed in the United States up until the EZB, the ECB, the European Central Bank, or even the German Bundesbank, they're completely the same. They manipulate money. That's their official assignment actually, and they run around spreading or telling the lie that they are completely independent from political and economical aspects. The opposite is the truth. They're highly corrupt. These central banks are recruited from the financial industry, selected by politicians and vice versa. So it's really the cooperation place. It's like the definition of fascism, to bundle up. That's what fascism actually means, to bundle different political powerhouses within a society into one unit of decision making. And that's actually what central banks are. So abolishing a central bank would be the thing we actually need to do. And like personally, it wouldn't need Bitcoin if we could keep fiat money, if we would manage to abolish central banks and actually take the control over fiat money from people who are manipulated. Technically, I see no real way to do that, because Bitcoin is a quite obvious way to do it, because that's actually what Bitcoin really does. It takes the control away from these manipulators. And that is the huge, great benefit Bitcoin has. Gold didn't manage to do that, because gold is also something we cannot yet just construct out of thin air. But obviously, we can make believe that we can just come up with gold out of thin air, because most people know that about 10 times the amount of actually really existent gold is sold by banks as gold. So they sell gold that actually nobody has, that is widely accepted. And that can't be done with Bitcoin, because everybody everywhere in the world can check how many Bitcoins are in circulations and actually where they are. So it's really, it's an historic thing with Bitcoin. Even if you hate the crypto concept, even if you firmly believe that the CIA is actually behind Bitcoin, and I really can't prove that it's not. I mean, it could really be that the CIA came up with Bitcoin, could be, but it doesn't change a thing, because Bitcoin really is the only technical way for everybody in the world at the same time to check how many things of Bitcoin exist and where they are. And that is what I really love about it. And it's quite logical that central banks and their connected political industries, because the politics is, Frank Zappa said, politics are the entertainment division of the war industry, of the military complex. That is true. Same goes for the central banks. They behave to the politics the same way. So this fascistic bundle of central bankers and political regimers, they can never accept Bitcoin as a method of payments for John Doe or just your average Joe. They will fight it till their last breath.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't believe that only the right people sitting at the printing machine would solve the problem, because I think the character of people is kind of how it is. It is corruptible. True. So in that sense, I think we need systems of decentralization, and Bitcoin. Yeah. I mean, it is. We don't know who Nakamoto was, but in the beginning, I had a problem with that. But now I think it doesn't really matter. It's better we don't know. And if it was the CIA, it wouldn't really matter, because the whole code is open source. And yeah, it is a possibility theoretically that we could make all the incoming, all the money flow of governments completely transparent, and therefore make much better decision and still keep privacy for the citizens, because you have ways of staying private.
I agree. Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, if we agree, Daniel, that they will fight it. They will fight it until the last breath. At the same time, they're really going into that asset, right? If you look at the transactions now, obviously huge companies are buying a vast amount of Bitcoin. It's the most loved asset with these really big players, JP Morgan and everybody. So of course the big banks and players are buying it, and they're setting up their politicians, who are nothing but their cheap whores. They're setting up their politicians to run around and tell people, stay out of Bitcoin. That's dangerous. I mean, we literally, the European Central Bank, they just warned all the Europeans never to buy Bitcoin. It's highly speculative and it's dangerous. Yeah, of course. That's what I would say. Don't touch that woman. She is vile and terrible and beautiful. I mean, it's so obvious. And what do we learn from that? What do we have to, or what's the consequence? I think as somebody like average Joe, just as ourselves, who does not have millions to buy these assets, I think the most important thing we need to learn is to actually get into a fighting mode, to get into a mode where we reject these tax laws and they're laws that take away our privacy, that criminalize us for wanting to stay in private with our wealth and wanting to have the means and technical ways to defend ourselves against the state.
If you're ready to take the next step and start saving in Bitcoin, the hardest money ever invented, with a fixed supply, a decentralized network, and no middleman, then check out the Bitbox, a highly secure, beginner-friendly hardware wallet trusted by pros. With a Bitbox, you can stack sats and take full control of your wealth. It's easy to use, battle-tested, and protects your Bitcoin from hacks, fraud, and seizure. Use my code RODEX at checkout to get 5% off and support my channel. This is not investment advice. It's just the smartest way I found to save long term. You'll find the link in the description. Don't wait. Become your own bank. Thank you.
And I've always been a friend of a liberal weapons and arms laws like the Swiss have or the Austrians. Germany never had that. They sort of banned their people from owning guns. Yeah, guess why? Guess why they do not want guns in the hands of Germans? That's nothing. Self-hating, obedient people who just sort of all of a sudden turn their hate against the oppressors. And they do not want people to be financially independent. So I think that really the first step is to get this mindset of thinking, no, it's absolutely legitimate and the right thing to do to keep the government away from your money and to not obey tax laws. You not obey transparency laws. You are in every right to hide your wealth from the government and to leave it unclear about what you possess. Of course, you just theoretically need to follow laws, but following laws can't be number one priority. Number one priority has to be defending your natural rights to defend yourself against a government that is a tyranny.
Yeah. And how are we courageous? And what do? We don't shut up on social media. We go on demonstrations. I mean, what tools do we have?
I think most people, at least that's what I learned in Germany, most people are too afraid to just publicly speak up. And that disappoints me, to be quite honest. I'm regularly very disappointed about many people. But what disappoints me even more is that they're not actually willing to do the little they can within the privacy of their immediate family. That they, for instance, they are too ashamed to put their money into gold and Bitcoin and bring it out of the country. I'm telling everybody in Germany right now, no matter how little you have, even if it's just a couple of €100 on your bank account. And if you're so afraid of cryptos, of Bitcoins, because people told you this is going to take away all your money, then at least transfer that money to Switzerland or to Liechtenstein or whatever, or buy gold nuggets, just hide them somewhere in the forest. Do something very basic without any crypto aspect. Do that. And they're even ashamed to do that. No, I need to be a good, obedient taxpayer. I'm not allowed to hide the money from my government. And as long as people are not willing to overcome that, if they're that afraid with something that the government can really prove, they're far away from speaking out publicly. We really have to encourage them to not be ashamed to defend their immediate livelihood and their immediate personal wealth. They need to support themselves. They are that broken in Germany now.
I mean, it's true. I mean, I think on the German bank accounts, you have like a couple of billions even. That's a huge risk to lose, because I mean, the money on your bank account is not even yours until you, because you're a creditor to the bank. So once the bank goes bankrupt.
Germans do not buy shares. They do not buy shares in company. They do not buy real estate. They are a nation of people who are for rent in their homes. That's very difficult to grasp for many Anglo-Saxons, the very low percentage of people who actually own their own home. And they are that afraid. They are a nation of people who believe in saving money on the bank and getting your sins for that. So what's sins? I'm sorry, I just lost that word. Interest rates. Yeah. And if you look to Switzerland for comparison, you normally have interest rates at around 0% for bank accounts there, because the Swiss, they do not save their money, they invest. The Germans don't do that.
Yeah, crazy. Very crazy. Well, so be courageous, adapt new systems, come up with new ideas, speak up, well, maybe one notch lower. Just don't be ashamed to have your own interests. Just be honest. It is absolutely legitimate for yourself to wanting to have a safe environment for your child, to demand the schools being places where they're not threatened for their life. It's completely legitimate to be non-religious. Like I was never attacked by Christians who wanted to force their beliefs on me, but Muslims regularly threaten me with violence if I do not accept their prophet there. And it is completely okay to reject that. You do not have to love these people if they come into your country. They are not an enrichment. They are invaders. And if they rape your wife or your child, they are criminals, violent criminals, and they need to be brought out of the country. And it's completely okay. And it is not a right extremist thing to say, and it's not degenerate in any way to be of this opinion. You do not have to shout it out. You do not have to speak up in public, but learn not to be ashamed in front of yourself for having absolutely legitimate personal interests. And if you take that one step, Bitcoin is the next. Absolutely. I mean, that's a whole subject for itself as well. I was one topic that I wanted to ask still, which is AI. What do you think about AI? Because we have all these issues, and I'm like, it's already difficult to wrap your head around it. And then you have AI, which I find, for me, it was always science fiction, and still until I started using it. Is AI going to help us to liberate us, or is it going to imprison us? How do you look at AI actually?
You know what? I think AI is like a gun. AI is like the internet. AI is like the printing machine, like Gutenberg's first printing machine. AI is the translation of the Bible from Latin to a language people actually speak. It's a technological revolution. It's a ways and means. And the question is how we're able and willing to use it. That's always the same thing with technical developments. And if you ask me, I mean, it's pretty simple. I went to surgery and intensive care and emergency medicine because I'm a huge fan of what we can technically do. I have a very bleak view of humanity, actually, and it became darker in the last years. I think we are a very technologically very successful ape, but we made no moral, no ethical efforts or no ethical advancements within the thousands of years that we actually have recordings about. We're still as brutal and stupid, but our technological development is quite nice in this short period of time. And I personally find technology wonderful. I mean, I'm a pilot. I'm a private pilot because I really find it fascinating that these. Sorry,
you flying planes?
Yeah, I started flying planes because I'm like a small child. I'm fascinated by the fact that these things actually fly. And if I look at the physics of it, the explanation seems quite simple, but it's a miracle that they fly. It's a miracle what we can do with machines in medicine. And of course, the bad part of our belief in these medical systems, is the pharmaceutical industry. It's our belief that like vaccine technology, for instance, can save save humanity, when obviously everything about the so-called mRNA vaccines is more or less a story from hell. I am at the same time, I'm a hunter, and I possess a lot of guns there. I was a sportsman, I was a marksman, and I really enjoy shooting. And at the same time, I do not like war, and I do not accept people just attacking other countries. So it's always a question of how you use technology. That is a banal, trivial thing to say. And my personal experience, like I recently coded a complete web application, a rather large PHP web application that I'm now hosting on my own service system. And I was never able to code a line of PHP. I completely came up with this whole app using just Grok. Took me 2 days to code something of about 300K file size, something that a coder would have taken weeks to do and to bug fix. And I did that all by myself in 2 days with Grok. And you can say what you want about these things. It's always a question of how you use them. And I think we will observe more extremes on both sides. AI can be used to manipulate many people with very effective instruments, to get them away from knowledge, from critical thinking, to get them to condition them, to program them. And at the same time, it can liberate many people, even people who had no access to libraries, to databases and everything. It can liberate people who are critical thinkers and who just are managed to free themselves from these mechanisms. And so it's a threat, yes, and at the same time it's a chance, and it always depends on how we use it. I'm sorry, I'm not negative about technology.
Well, great, that sounds good. Yeah, wow. Maybe as a final question, I mean, you already said that the future looks quite bleak to you. You're not that hopeful, but what does still drive you, and do you see any is there anything positive that you see in the future happening?
Absolutely, because the future that I believe is bleak is the immediate future. And I mean, it's simple for me. I have a rather small child, and I have little choice but to fight for a break of dawn that I might never live to see. That could happen. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I'm not sure about what's happening to my country in the next years. Could really turn into a hellhole yet again. Something between the GDR and the Nazi and Reich is absolutely possible. But I mean, the time will move on, and from what we learned about history is that all these things come and go in waves. So I believe that with the extreme speed these developments have developed within the last few years, if I try to extrapolate the changes that will happen, I believe that a crash in some way, some form of disintegration of this present German Reich and the terrible so-called European Union, that will take place. Maybe in 1 year, maybe in half a year, maybe in 10 years, maybe in 15 years, but I don't think it will take 20 years. And what other chance do we have for our children to just keep fighting for that and make sure that they have a chance to enjoy their lives? I remember the 80s and the 90s, and they were kind of fun. So I want my children and children of my friends to have a similar time there. And if it's not now, maybe in a couple of years.
Great. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your input. That was very interesting. Yeah, let's be courageous. Let's speak out. Let's speak up. Let's not be afraid. And let's try something new. Let's adapt to new systems. And yeah, let's see.
And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, good one.
Daniel, thanks for having me.
Thank you.